The morning sun of Nexus Prime cast its warm light across the towering spires of the Galactic Cooperative's capital city. 12 different species lived and worked together in what many called the greatest achievement in galactic history. The city itself was a marvel of cooperation, with buildings designed to accommodate the needs of every member race. Sarah Chen walked through the central plaza, her human form looking small compared to the massive thorax who moved heavy construction materials with their powerful arms. Nearby, a group of Zalani worked with their crystalline computers, their translucent fingers dancing across surfaces that glowed with complex calculations. The sight still amazed her after 5 years as humanity's representative to the cooperative. The Galactic Cooperative had formed 300 years ago when the first alien species met and decided to work together instead of fighting. Each species brought something special to the alliance. The Zalani were masters of technology, creating computers and machines that seemed almost alive. The Thorax could build anything, their massive bodies and incredible strength letting them construct cities and space stations in record time. The Miralites were perhaps the most valued members. Their telepathic abilities allowed perfect communication between all species, translating not just words but emotions and intentions. No misunderstandings could exist when a Miralite was present. The snake-like Sithrak were masters of logistics, able to organize complex supply chains across hundreds of worlds. The Kethvar, ancient and wise, served as historians and advisors. Each species had their place, their role, their contribution to the greater whole, each except the humans. Sarah remembered the day 50 years ago when humanity first made contact with the cooperative. Earth's radio signals had been detected by a Zalani exploration ship, and first contact had gone better than anyone could have hoped. The aliens were peaceful, welcoming, and eager to share their knowledge. Humanity had jumped at the chance to join something greater than themselves. 2 billion humans had spread across 17 worlds in cooperative space, building new lives among the stars. They learned alien languages, adapted to different gravities and atmospheres, and tried to find their place in this vast alliance. But what was humanity's special contribution? That question had haunted human leaders for decades. The Thorax could lift objects that would require human machines. The Zalani could solve mathematical problems in seconds that would take human computers hours. The Miralites could communicate across language barriers instantly. What could humans offer that these advanced species needed? The answer, it seemed, was very little. Humans ended up in what the cooperative politely called support roles. They worked as assistants to alien specialists, helped maintain equipment, and served in various administrative positions. Some humans became diplomats, though their lack of telepathic abilities made them less effective than Miralite negotiators. Others became engineers, though their designs were always improved upon by Tharic builders or Zalani technicians. The most common human job title in the cooperative database was problem solver, though nobody seemed quite sure what problems humans actually solved. Sarah had held that title herself before becoming humanity's representative. She had spent most of her time traveling between different worlds, helping with small issues that arose between species or in joint projects. The work had been satisfying, but Sarah often struggled to explain exactly what she did. When a Zalani computer system couldn't interface properly with Tharic construction equipment, she would spend time with both species and somehow find a way to make things work. When 2 different alien cultures clashed over resource allocation, she would organize meetings and facilitate discussions until a solution emerged. To the other species, these seemed like minor administrative tasks. Any intelligent being should be able to handle such simple problems, they believed. The fact that these issues often disappeared when humans got involved was seen as coincidence rather than skill. Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's chief scientist on Nexus Prime, had tried for years to quantify what humans brought to the cooperative. His reports showed increased efficiency in projects with human oversight, fewer conflicts between species when humans were present, and higher satisfaction ratings in mixed-species work environments. But the numbers were subtle, difficult to prove definitively. "We're the glue," Marcus often told Sarah during their weekly meetings. "We hold things together in ways that aren't obvious until we're gone." But the Cooperative Council didn't see it that way. To them, humans were a drain on resources. Every human needed food, housing, medical care, and education. Human colonies required protection and support. Human workers took positions that could be filled by more specialized aliens or automated systems. The mathematics were simple, according to Zalani economists. The cooperative spent more resources supporting humanity than humans contributed back. In a perfectly efficient alliance, that meant only one thing. Ambassador Kent of the Thorax had been the first to raise the question during a council session 6 months ago. "Why do we continue to support a species that offers no unique capabilities?" he had asked in his deep, rumbling voice. The question had sparked months of debate. The Miralites, led by Telandra, argued that humans provided something valuable that couldn't be measured in simple economic terms. The ancient Kethvar agreed, warning that removing humans might have unforeseen consequences. But the other 10 species saw only numbers: resources in, contributions out, efficiency calculations, and optimization protocols. To them, the answer was obvious. Sarah felt the weight of that impending decision as she walked through the plaza. She had requested this emergency meeting with the council, though she wasn't sure what she could say that hadn't already been said. How do you prove your worth to beings who see the galaxy in terms of specialization and optimization? A young human child ran past her, chasing a ball that bounced in the low gravity of the artificial environment. The child was laughing, playing with a small Zalani and 2 young Thorax in a game that none of their species had invented alone. It was a human game, modified by Zalani mathematics and Theric engineering, creating something new and joyful. Sarah watched the children play and felt a deep sadness. They didn't know that their entire future in the stars was about to be decided by a vote. They didn't understand that their parents were seen as unnecessary burden rather than valuable members of an interstellar community. The council chambers loomed ahead, their crystalline walls designed by Zalani architects and built by Theric workers. Sarah straightened her shoulders and prepared to make humanity's case one final time, even though she suspected the decision had already been made. The council chamber fell silent as the voting results appeared on the massive display screen. 10 green lights, 2 red lights. The decision was final and irreversible. Humanity would leave cooperative space within 6 months. Sarah stared at the results, feeling like the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. She had known this was coming, had seen the writing on the wall for months, but the reality still hit her like a physical blow. 2 billion humans, scattered across 17 worlds, would have to abandon everything they had built and start over. Ambassador Kent of the Thorax stood to address the chamber. His massive frame cast shadows across the curved walls as he spoke in his deep, measured voice. The decision has been made democratically and fairly. Humanity will be provided with basic transport vessels and allowed to take personal belongings and non-classified technology. The transition will be handled with dignity and respect. Dignity and respect, Sarah whispered to herself. How dignified was it to throw an entire species out of their homes because they didn't fit into neat economic categories? Telandra, the Miralite representative who had voted against the expulsion, approached Sarah after the session ended. Her serpentine form moved gracefully across the chamber floor, and her large, dark eyes showed genuine sadness. "I am sorry, Sarah Chen," Telandra said, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Miralites possessed. "My people sensed something important about human minds during our telepathic contacts." There is a pattern in human thought that we do not fully understand, but we believe it serves a purpose. Sarah managed a weak smile. What kind of pattern? Chaos that becomes order. Randomness that finds solutions. Your species thinks in ways that break established rules, but somehow arrive at correct answers. We tried to explain this to the council, but they do not value what they cannot measure. The ancient HFY representative, Wisdom Keeper Threnex, joined their conversation. His crystalline body sparkled in the chamber's soft lighting as he spoke in his slow, deliberate manner. In my species' long history, we have learned that efficiency is not the only virtue. Sometimes the most important contributions are the ones that seem least significant. But words of support, however kind, could not change the vote. The expulsion order was already being transmitted across cooperative space. Human families would receive the news within hours, and the massive logistics of relocating an entire species would begin immediately. The next 6 months passed in a blur of heartbreak and chaos. Sarah watched as the life her species had built among the stars was systematically dismantled. Families that had lived on alien worlds for decades were forced to pack only what they could carry. Children who had never seen Earth had to leave the only homes they had ever known. The worst part was watching the other species react to the expulsion. Most seemed relieved, as if a burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The Zilani immediately began reassigning facilities that humans had managed, confident that their computer systems could handle the work more efficiently. The Thorax started modifying construction projects that had been designed with human input, simplifying them according to their own engineering principles. Only the Miralites and HFY seemed troubled by what was happening. Sarah often saw Telandra watching the human evacuation ships with an expression that might have been sadness, though reading emotions on an alien face was always difficult. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent his final weeks on Nexus Prime trying to document everything humans had contributed to cooperative projects. His reports filled dozens of data files, but Sarah knew they would probably never be read. The decision had been made, and the other species were eager to move forward without looking back. "We're making a mistake," Marcus told her, as they waited for transport to the Outer Rim territories. "The cooperative doesn't understand what they're losing." "Maybe we don't understand it either," Sarah replied. "Maybe we never really figured out what we were good at." The human convoy that left cooperative space was both impressive and heartbreaking. Hundreds of ships carrying 2 billion refugees heading toward the dangerous frontier regions that no other species wanted. The Outer Rim was filled with unstable star systems, asteroid fields, cosmic storms, and unknown dangers. The cooperative had given humanity basic colony ships and enough supplies to establish settlements, but nothing more. All advanced technology had to be left behind. Human engineers had to work with primitive tools compared to what they had grown accustomed to during their time in the Alliance. Sarah's ship was one of the last to leave, and she stood at the observation deck watching Nexus Prime shrink into the distance. The beautiful city where 12 species had lived in harmony was now home to only 11. She wondered if the remaining species would even notice the difference. The journey to the Outer Rim took 3 months through space that the cooperative had marked as too dangerous for regular travel. Cosmic storms buffeted their ships, and asteroid fields forced them to take long detours. Several ships suffered damage from radiation bursts that came without warning, but somehow they made it through. Human pilots proved surprisingly good at navigating the chaotic space, finding paths through storms that computer calculations said were impossible. Engineers managed to keep ships running with makeshift repairs that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. When they finally reached the edge of cooperative space, Sarah felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Behind them lay everything they had lost. Ahead lay complete uncertainty, but also freedom to be whatever they chose to become. The first human colony was established on a planet orbiting a temperamental star that produced dangerous solar flares. Cooperative science had declared it uninhabitable, but human settlers found ways to work around the radiation bursts. They built underground cities and developed warning systems that let them take shelter during the worst storms. Other colonies followed, scattered across dozens of worlds that had been rejected by the cooperative as too dangerous or too difficult. Humans seemed to have a talent for making homes in places where other species saw only obstacles. Sarah established the new human government on a space station built from salvaged materials in orbit around a gas giant. The station had no formal name, but everyone called it Haven. From there, she watched as humanity began to rebuild their civilization from scratch. The first year was hard. People struggled with limited resources and primitive technology. But gradually, something interesting began to happen. Without the cooperative's advanced systems to rely on, humans started developing their own solutions to problems. Their technology was cruder than what they had left behind, but it worked reliably in the harsh conditions of the outer rim. More importantly, they started to discover who they really were when they weren't trying to fit into someone else's definition of useful. For the first time in 50 years, humanity was free to follow their own path among the stars. Sarah often wondered what was happening back in cooperative space, but there was no communication allowed. The expulsion had been complete and final. Whatever problems or successes the Alliance was experiencing, humanity was no longer part of their story. 3 years had passed since the last human transport ship disappeared beyond the edge of cooperative space. The Council of 12 had become the Council of 11, and most members had already forgotten about the species they had expelled. The efficiency reports showed improvements in almost every category, just as the economists had predicted. Ambassador Kent reviewed the latest statistics with satisfaction. Resource allocation was up 12%. Construction projects were finishing ahead of schedule. Communication between species had improved, now that everything went through proper mirror-light translation protocols instead of the messy human-mediated discussions that had sometimes confused issues. But lately, small problems had started appearing in the reports. Nothing major, just minor inefficiencies that seemed to crop up in unexpected places. The first sign appeared in the Arcturus shipyard project, a massive construction effort involving Theric engineers and Zelani computer systems. The facility was designed to build the next generation of cooperative exploration vessels, combining the best technology from multiple species. Engineer Prime Gorlak of the Thorax stood in the command center, his massive hands clenched in frustration as he stared at the display screens. The Zelani computer systems were rejecting his construction plans for the 3rd time this week. The crystalline processors calculate that your structural modifications will create instability, explained technician Veltar, her translucent form flickering as she interfaced with the computer network. The mathematical models show a 0.3% chance of failure under extreme stress conditions. 0.3%, Gorlak rumbled. My people have been building structures for centuries. We know what will hold and what will break. Your computers are being too careful. Veltar's form shimmered with what might have been confusion. The calculations are perfect. The Zelani computational matrix does not make errors in mathematical analysis. This was the problem. The Theric engineering approach relied on experience and intuition built up over generations of construction work. They could look at a design and know instinctively whether it would work, even if the calculations were close. The Zelani computers, however, could only work with precise mathematical models. In the past, humans had somehow bridged this gap. Sarah Chen and others like her had spent time with both species, asking questions and facilitating discussions until compromises were found. The Thorax couldn't explain their intuitive knowledge in mathematical terms, and the Zelani couldn't program intuition into their computers. But humans had found ways to translate between the two approaches. Now, without that translation, projects ground to a halt whenever the two species disagreed. The computer said one thing, experience said another, and there was no way to reconcile the differences. Similar problems were appearing throughout cooperative space. The Miralites, despite their telepathic abilities, were struggling to mediate disputes between other species. Their telepathy let them understand emotions and intentions perfectly, but that sometimes made things worse rather than better. Telandra found herself dealing with an increasingly serious conflict in the Vega system, where Sithrak logistics coordinators were clashing with Kethvar historians over the proper way to establish supply routes to newly discovered archaeological sites. The Sithrak wanted to create efficient transportation networks that would minimize cost and delivery time. The Kethvar insisted that any supply routes must be designed to avoid disturbing ancient cultural sites, even if that made logistics more complicated. Both sides were absolutely certain they were right. The Sithrak could prove mathematically that their approach was superior. The Kethvar could cite centuries of precedent for protecting historical locations. And Telandra's telepathic contact with both species only made the conflict more intense, because she could feel how passionate each side was about their position. "I do not understand why this is so difficult," Telandra reported to the council during their monthly meeting. "In the past, such disputes were resolved quickly. Now they seem to escalate beyond control. Perhaps your telepathic mediation approach needs refinement," suggested Ambassador Kenth. "The humans often handled these conflicts through lengthy discussion sessions. Surely your mental abilities should be more efficient." But efficiency was becoming the problem. The cooperative had been designed around the idea that each species contributed their special abilities to create a perfect alliance. The Zalani provided optimal calculations. The Thorax provided maximum strength. The Miralites provided perfect communication. What no one had realized was that perfection in each area didn't automatically create perfection overall. Sometimes the optimal solution from one perspective was completely wrong from another perspective. Sometimes perfect communication made conflicts worse by highlighting irreconcilable differences. The humans hadn't been perfect at anything, but they had been good enough at many things. More importantly, they had been able to find imperfect solutions that somehow worked better than perfect solutions that couldn't be implemented. The problems multiplied throughout the fourth year. Exploration missions began reporting strange difficulties. Ships that had been designed by committee, with each species contributing their best ideas, often failed in unexpected ways. The Zalani computers had calculated every possible scenario, but reality kept presenting scenarios that hadn't been considered. Captain Zethmore of the Thorax led an exploration mission to the Frontier Nebula, using a ship that represented the pinnacle of cooperative engineering. Every system had been optimized, every component designed for maximum efficiency. The mission lasted exactly 6 days before disaster struck. The ship's navigation systems, designed by Zalani technicians, failed to account for the chaotic magnetic fields generated by the nebula's gas clouds. The Theric-built hull could withstand the physical stresses, but the perfectly calculated structural modifications made the ship too rigid to adapt when conditions changed unexpectedly. "The situation requires improvised solutions," Captain Zethmore reported in his final transmission. "But our systems are not designed for improvisation. Every modification requires committee approval and mathematical verification." The ship was eventually rescued, but only after significant damage and the loss of valuable research time. The post-mission analysis revealed a troubling pattern. Cooperative ships were becoming less effective at handling unexpected situations, not more. The most serious problems appeared in the border sectors, regions where cooperative territory met unknown space. These areas had always required careful management, balancing exploration with security and diplomacy with caution. The Vakti sector erupted into chaos during the 5th year. 3 different species were claiming rights to the same star system, and each had valid arguments according to cooperative law. The Zalani had calculated resource values, the Sithrak had established supply lines, and the Miralites had made first contact with a primitive local species. In the past, human mediators had handled such complex situations by organizing joint conferences where all parties could present their cases and work toward compromise. The humans had a talent for finding solutions that gave everyone something they wanted while ensuring no one got everything they demanded. Without human mediation, the 3 species simply presented their claims to the council and waited for a ruling. But the council discovered that cooperative law had no clear mechanism for resolving such complex, overlapping claims. The legal framework assumed that disputes would be resolved through discussion and compromise before reaching the council level. "We need new protocols," Ambassador Kent announced during an emergency session. "Legal frameworks that can handle these complex situations automatically. But creating new legal frameworks required input from all 11 species, and each species approached the problem differently. The Zalani wanted mathematical formulas for calculating fair resource distribution. The Thorax wanted simple, strong rules that couldn't be misinterpreted. The Miralites wanted emotional considerations included in legal decisions. The committee formed to address the problem spent 8 months in discussion without reaching any conclusions. Meanwhile, the Vakti sector situation continued to deteriorate, threatening to break into open conflict. Similar problems appeared throughout cooperative space. Projects that had run smoothly for decades began experiencing delays and cost overruns. Communication between species, despite perfect Miraliti translation, somehow became more difficult rather than easier. Exploration and expansion, the driving forces of cooperative growth, slowed to a crawl as ships became too specialized to handle the chaos of unknown space. The statistics that had once shown steady improvement began showing decline. Efficiency was down across most categories. Member satisfaction surveys revealed growing frustration and confusion. For the first time in cooperative history, some species began questioning whether the alliance was still beneficial. But none of the remaining 11 species understood what was happening. They could see the problems, but they couldn't identify the cause. Each species looked for solutions within their own areas of expertise, not realizing that the problem wasn't technical or mathematical or logical. The problem was that perfect specialization, without someone to bridge the gaps between specialties, created a system that was both incredibly efficient and completely unable to adapt to real-world complexity. The crisis reached its breaking point in the 6th year after the human expulsion. The Vakti sector had erupted into open conflict, with 3 cooperative species deploying military vessels against each other for the first time in the Alliance's history. 2 major technological projects had failed catastrophically, causing billions of credits in losses. Most shocking of all, exploration beyond cooperative borders had stopped completely. Ambassador Kent stood before the emergency council session, his usually confident demeanor cracked with worry. The massive Therak had aged visibly over the past year, the stress of mounting failures weighing heavily on his broad shoulders. "The situation is no longer sustainable," he announced to the assembled representatives. "Our alliance faces the greatest crisis in its 300-year history. If we cannot identify and resolve the underlying cause of our difficulties, the cooperative itself may collapse." The chamber fell into worried silence. For species that had grown accustomed to steady progress and increasing prosperity, the idea of failure was almost unthinkable. Technician Veltar of the Zalani flickered nervously as she presented her analysis. "Our computational models have analyzed every variable in our current system. Resource allocation algorithms are functioning at optimal efficiency. Communication protocols are operating within normal parameters. Infrastructure maintenance is proceeding on schedule, yet overall system performance continues to decline." "The mathematics make no sense," she continued, her translucent form shimmering with frustration. According to all calculations, our alliance should be more effective now than ever before. We have eliminated the inefficiencies created by human involvement. Each species is working at peak specialization. The results should be superior. But the results were anything but superior, and everyone in the chamber knew it. It was Telandra of the Miralites who first began to understand what had gone wrong. As a historian and telepathic specialist, she had access to detailed records of how the cooperative had functioned during the human era. More importantly, her species' telepathic abilities let her sense patterns of thought and emotion that other species missed. I have been reviewing archived communications from pre-expulsion period, she announced, her musical voice carrying a note of discovery. There are patterns in the data that we have not fully understood. She activated the chamber's holographic display, showing a complex network of communication flows between different species and projects. This represents information exchange during a typical month 5 years ago when humans were still present. The display showed thousands of interconnected lines between different species, projects, and locations. But interwoven throughout the network were thinner lines marked in a different color. These connections represent human involvement in cooperative activities, Telandra explained. At first examination, they appear minor. Humans participated in less than 15% of major projects and held no senior leadership positions. Their direct contributions seem insignificant. Ambassador Kent frowned. That confirms our original assessment. Human participation was minimal. But observe what happens when we remove the human connections, Telandra said, modifying the display. The network that had appeared so robust suddenly became fragmented. Clusters of species-specific activity remained connected within themselves, but the connections between different clusters became sparse and weak. What had been a unified network became a collection of isolated islands. The humans served as bridges, Telandra continued. They connected activities that would otherwise have remained separate. Their participation created pathways for information and cooperation that we did not recognize as essential. Wisdom Keeper Threnex of the ancient Kethvar slowly rose from his crystalline meditation platform. His species had lived longer than any other in the cooperative, and his words carried special weight. "In my people's ancient records," he said in his slow, deliberate manner, "there are accounts of similar patterns. Systems that appeared stable until a seemingly minor component was removed, causing cascade failures throughout the entire structure." He paused, his crystalline form sparkling as he accessed deep memories. "Your species called them keystone species, I believe. Organisms that played roles far more important than their numbers might suggest." The revelation sent shock waves through the chamber. Ambassador Kent felt his certainty crumbling as he began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Dr. Zalveth, a Miralite psychologist, had been conducting her own investigation. She presented evidence that made the situation even more disturbing. "I have analyzed the decision-making patterns in failed projects," she reported. "In every case, the problems arose at interaction points between different species specializations. Our engineering teams could not adapt to unexpected circumstances because adaptation requires the kind of flexible thinking that no single species possesses." She displayed examples from the Arcturus shipyard project and the exploration mission failures. "Theric engineering relies on intuitive knowledge that cannot be quantified. Zalani computers require precise mathematical models. In the past, humans somehow translated between these approaches, finding solutions that incorporated both perspectives. But humans have no special telepathic or computational abilities," protested Technician Veltar. "How could they bridge gaps that our advanced capabilities cannot?" Dr. Zalveth's response was disturbing. "Because they think differently than any of us. Human minds appear to be naturally adapted for what they call lateral thinking. finding connections between unrelated concepts and developing solutions that don't follow logical progressions. She shared recordings of human problem-solving sessions from the archives. The chamber watched in fascination as human negotiators like Sarah Chen worked through complex disputes, not by applying superior logic or telepathic insight, but by asking unexpected questions and suggesting combinations that no other species would have considered. They do not optimize for single variables, Dr. Zalveth explained. Instead, they seek adequate solutions across multiple variables simultaneously. This approach is inefficient by our standards, but it produces results that work in the chaotic conditions of real-world implementation. The final piece of evidence came from Captain Mortek, one of the few surviving members of the Frontier Exploration Program. His ship had been one of the last to successfully complete a deep space mission before the exploration program was suspended due to repeated failures. "I reviewed my mission logs from 7 years ago," he reported grimly. "My human advisor was Commander Lisa Park. I remember thinking her suggestions were often illogical and inefficient. She would recommend backup plans for situations that our computers calculated had less than 1% probability of occurrence." Captain Mortek's voice grew heavy with regret. Every single mission failure of the past 3 years involved exactly those low-probability scenarios that Commander Park used to plan for. The situations she prepared us for were precisely the ones that destroyed our ships when we had no humans to warn us. The chamber erupted in stunned conversation as the full scope of their error became clear. They had expelled an entire species based on the assumption that specialized efficiency was always superior to generalized adaptability. They had measured human contributions only in terms of direct output, not in terms of the connections and adaptive capabilities that humans had provided to the entire system. Ambassador Kent called for order, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership during crisis. If this analysis is correct, then we face a choice between admitting our mistake and watching our civilization collapse. "The humans must be contacted," Talandra said firmly. "We must ask them to return." But Technician Veltar raised a troubling point. "Our data indicates that human colonies in the Outer Rim territories have gone silent. Their communication signals stopped reaching our monitoring stations 2 years ago. We do not know if humanity still exists as a viable civilization. The possibility that they had not only expelled humanity but caused their destruction sent waves of horror through the chamber. The species that had prided themselves on peaceful cooperation might have committed genocide through negligence. We must send ships to find them," declared Wisdom Keeper Threnex. "If humanity survives, we must humble ourselves and request their aid. If they have perished, then we must face the consequences of our decision." Ambassador Kent looked around the chamber at representatives of 11 species who had believed themselves superior to the humble humans they had expelled. "Prepare our fastest ships and most diplomatic crews. We go to the Outer Rim territories not as the powerful cooperative, but as suppliants seeking help from those we wronged." The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that had expelled humanity for being inefficient were now desperately hoping that human adaptability had been sufficient to survive in the chaos of the Outer Rim. Their greatest fear was that the qualities they had dismissed as worthless might not have been strong enough to save the species that possessed them. The cooperative fleet that entered the Outer Rim territories was the most advanced exploration force ever assembled. Led by Ambassador Kent himself, it included representatives from all 11 remaining species and the most sophisticated detection equipment available. Their mission was simple: find humanity and ask for help. What they found in the chaotic space beyond cooperative borders defied every expectation. Captain Velnara, a skilled Mirrorlight navigator, was the first to detect the anomalous readings. "Ambassador, I am receiving structured signals from the Kepler 442 system," The patterns suggest organized industrial activity. Ambassador Kent studied the data with growing confusion. According to cooperative surveys, Kepler 442 was a dead system with an unstable star that produced dangerous radiation bursts. No intelligent species would try to build anything there. Could this be remnants of the human Exodus fleet? He asked. Negative, replied technician Varesh, the Zelani electronics specialist. These readings indicate large-scale construction and energy production far beyond what the human colony ships could have achieved. The power outputs are comparable to our major industrial worlds. As the fleet moved deeper into the outer rim, they encountered more impossible readings. System after system that cooperative science had declared uninhabitable showed signs of thriving civilizations. More disturbing still, long-range sensors detected ship designs that didn't match any known cooperative technology. The first direct contact came when 3 unknown vessels appeared on their sensors, approaching from the direction of a pulsar that had been considered absolutely deadly to any form of life. Unknown fleet, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation vessel Resilience. Please state your purpose in Federation space. The communication sent shockwaves through the cooperative ships. Sarah Chen was alive, and judging from her title, humanity had not just survived, but organized into some kind of government. Ambassador Kent personally took the communication. Captain Chen, this is Ambassador Kent of the Theric people representing the Galactic Cooperative Council. We have come seeking humanity. There was a long pause before Sarah's voice returned, and when it did, there was unmistakable amusement in her tone. Well, Ambassador Kent, you've found us. Though I suspect we're not quite what you expected to find. The human ships that escorted the cooperative fleet to their destination were indeed nothing like what anyone expected. They were smaller than cooperative vessels, but moved with incredible grace through the dangerous space of the outer rim. Their technology was clearly different, combining salvaged cooperative components with innovations that seemed to ignore several laws of physics. How are your ships operating in this radiation field? Asked Technician Varesh as they passed through a particularly intense cosmic storm. Adaptive shielding, came the reply from a human engineer. We learned to work with the chaos instead of fighting it. Sometimes the best protection is flexibility rather than strength. The destination that Captain Chen led them to was the most shocking discovery of all. Haven, the human capital, had grown from a simple space station into a massive complex that sprawled across 3 asteroids and 2 artificial platforms. But it wasn't just human ships docked there. Ambassador Kent counted at least 12 different ship designs he didn't recognize, representing species that weren't part of the cooperative database. As they approached the docking bay, he could see beings walking the station corridors that were completely unknown to cooperative science. Captain Chen, he said carefully, it appears you have made contact with other species. 17 of them, actually, Sarah replied cheerfully. Turns out the outer rim is full of intelligent life that your surveys missed. Most of them were hiding from your exploration ships, afraid they'd be judged and found wanting. The delegation that met them at Haven's main airlock was unlike anything the cooperative representatives had ever seen. Sarah Chen, now bearing the rank of Admiral, led a group that included not just humans, but beings of shapes and sizes that challenged every assumption about life in the galaxy. There was a crystalline entity that communicated through harmonic vibrations, a gaseous being that existed partially in subspace, and creatures that looked like living metal sculptures. Some breathed oxygen, others required methane atmospheres, and at least one seemed to exist entirely on electromagnetic radiation. How do you communicate with such diverse species? Telandra asked, her telepathic abilities useless with most of the alien forms before her. The same way we always did, Admiral Chen replied. We listen, we ask questions, we try different approaches until something works. It turns out that when you're not worried about optimizing every interaction, you can find ways to connect with anyone. The tour of Haven revealed the extent of humanity's transformation. The station wasn't just larger than expected. It was a thriving center of trade, research, and cultural exchange. The humans had created a loose alliance of species that called themselves the Federation, based not on specialized contributions, but on mutual cooperation and respect. Each species brings what they can and takes what they need, Admiral Chen explained, as they walked through a market area where beings of 12 different types conducted business in a dozen different ways. We don't measure worth by efficiency or specialization. We measure it by willingness to help and learn. Ambassador Kent found himself struggling to understand how such a chaotic system could function. But how do you resolve disputes? How do you ensure fair resource allocation? The same way humans always solve problems, replied Dr. Marcus Webb, who had aged considerably but remained sharp and energetic. We talk things through until we find solutions everyone can live with. It's messy and inefficient, but it works. The most impressive discovery was humanity's technological advancement. Cut off from cooperative resources, humans had been forced to innovate. Their new technology was neither as elegant as Zelani computers nor as powerful as Tharic engineering, but it was incredibly adaptable. We call it good enough engineering, explained Chief Engineer Rodriguez as she showed them through the station's power plant. Nothing we build is perfect, but everything we build can be modified, repaired, or adapted when conditions change. The power plant itself was a perfect example. It combined solar collection, fusion reactors, and some kind of exotic energy tap that drew power directly from the nearby pulsar's magnetic field. No single component was as efficient as cooperative technology, but the system as a whole was more robust and flexible. When the formal negotiations began, the cooperative delegation found themselves in the uncomfortable position of supplicants. They needed human help desperately, but they had very little to offer in return. Admiral Chen listened patiently as Ambassador Kent explained the crisis facing the cooperative. Ships that couldn't adapt, projects that failed when conditions changed, conflicts that couldn't be resolved, and an alliance slowly falling apart from internal contradictions. "You're asking us to come back and fix the problems our expulsion created," she said when he finished. "Yes," Kent replied simply. "We realize now that we made a grave error. Humanity provided capabilities that we didn't understand and couldn't replace. We need those capabilities if our civilization is to survive." Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair, studying the representatives of the species that had expelled her people 6 years ago. "And what exactly are you offering in exchange?" The cooperative delegation had prepared for this question, but their offers seemed pathetic in the face of what humanity had accomplished independently. Advanced technology that humans had already surpassed or adapted differently. Membership in an alliance that was falling apart. Resources from territories that were less dynamic than the chaotic but vibrant Outer Rim. "We understand that we are not negotiating from a position of strength," Ambassador Kent said humbly. "We can only offer what we have and hope that humanity's generosity extends to forgiveness for our past mistakes." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, consulting with her advisors in whispered conversations that included several non-human voices. Finally, she turned back to the delegation. "We'll consider returning to cooperative space," she said, "but not as junior partners trying to fit into your definition of useful. We've learned who we are out here, and we won't give that up again." "What are your terms?" asked Telandra. "First, the Federation comes with us. All 17 species become full members of the cooperative, with all the rights and privileges that entails. Second, we keep our territory in the Outer Rim and our right to govern ourselves. Third, humans hold leadership positions proportional to our contributions, not proportional to our specializations. The terms were far more extensive than the cooperative had expected, But they were not unreasonable. The 17 new species would bring knowledge and capabilities that could benefit everyone. Human autonomy in the Outer Rim would actually reduce the cooperative's administrative burden, and human leadership positions would be earned through demonstrated ability rather than granted as charity. There is one more condition, Admiral Chen added. The cooperative must formally acknowledge that every member species has value, regardless of how that value is measured. No species will ever again be expelled for failing to meet efficiency standards. Ambassador Kenth looked around at his fellow delegates and saw agreement in their faces. They had learned, perhaps too late, that efficiency without adaptability was a dead end. "We accept your terms," he said formally. The cooperative would be honored to welcome humanity and their allies as full partners in our alliance. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since the negotiations began, it was a genuinely warm expression. "Then let's get to work. You've got a lot of problems that need solving, and we've gotten pretty good at fixing things that shouldn't work, but somehow do.